This is Diana Sullivan in Austin, Texas. I'm doing a lesson on dividing and knitting a neckline. But what's unusual about this one is I knitted both sides of the neck at the same time. I did have to have an extra ball of yarn wound up ahead of time so that I could put one color in one feeder and put the second ball of yarn in the second feeder. The first step when you're doing this with an electronic machine is to program the machine so that all the needles to the left of 0 are selected and all the needles to the right of 0 are not selected. On this 270 Brother, to get it to select all the needles as contrasting color to the left of 0, we have to put in a pattern. So we press the input key. It tells us that the next pattern number that we have is 939. That's fine, so we hit step. Now this is a very simple pattern. It's one stitch and one row. So when it lights that S lamp, it wants to know how many stitches. 1. And then when you press step, it lights the R lamp and it displays 998. Well, that's the most rows I can put in. But I press clear entry to clear the screen, and I press 1. Now I'm ready to press step, and it's ready for me to put in the first row. Well, there's only one row and there's only one stitch, and all I do is press the black key. It beeps because that fills it up, and even if you went up a row, it wouldn't matter. That's the whole pattern. Now I press the input key and I'm through with inputting the pattern. Now that I have put in program 939, it's very typical for me to have my machine set on pattern selector 1, which gives me patterns all over, but I don't want patterns all over. That would select every needle. I want some of the bed to be patterned. In fact, I want from the left-hand needle, which is needle number 57 left to the center, to be patterned, and that's all. So I press needle selector 2. When I press step, it wants to know what pattern I'm on, and I'm on 939, which I just programmed. Step again. Then the light that lights is the quantity light, and it wants to know how many repeats of my pattern. Well, it's a one stitch pattern. I'm going to have it from 0 all the way to the left, and all the way to the left is 57 needles left of 0. So 57 repeats. Step. Now it wants to know the position. Well, the machine naturally centers the thing, and that's a wonderful feature most of the time, but in my case I want it to start not at needle 29, which would center it, but I want it to start way over on needle number 57. Now needles to the left of 0 are orange, so I press clear entry to empty the screen. The orange and yellow buttons light, or the lights light. I press orange, and I'm going to do orange 57. That positions it to the left of 0. And then I press step. It wants to know if I'm putting in a second pattern. Now, that's a wonderful feature if I am, but I'm not. So I just put in a 0, and then I press step, and the ready light comes on. Now, it would be nice if I could test this and make sure I'm getting what I want. Let's do that. I brought some needles out into working position in the middle of the bed, and I've set my carriage to select needles. There's no yarn on there yet. I go outside the turn mark, and I just bring the carriage across, and oh good, here's my 0 mark and all the needles to the left of 0 selected. All the needles to the right of 0 did not select, and one more time. Great, it's doing just what I want it to do. Now let me show you how to knit the neckline without having to take part of it off and knit one side at a time. You can do both sides at once. One row before dividing for the neck, I need to do a setup row. So my carriage is on the left, and I'm going to knit this one more row selecting needles. I go outside the turn mark set my machine to select needles, and go from left to right. It did just what I wanted it to do. Left of 0, it selected the needles. Right of 0, it did not. Now I can set the carriage so that it carries 2 balls of yarn. I press this top MC button. MC stands for multicolor, but I have 2 balls of the same color of yarn. And I am putting my second color of yarn into the MC feeder, that's the B feeder. So I have the main color back in A and the B color in B. There's another thing I need to do before I can proceed with my neck. It's very typical for a pattern to have you scrap off a few stitches in the middle before you go on with your neck. Even for the V-neck I'm about to do, I need to do that. I need to take the 2 center stitches off. Well, I'm not using waste yarn for this. I am just sewing them off onto a piece of yarn. Get the second one. So I'm getting needle number 1 left and needle number 1 right, putting their stitches onto a little piece of scrap yarn. And I don't want this yarn behind the gate peg. There we go. That's how I want that yarn. And I push those 2 needles back out of work. Now I'm threaded with both colors, and when I knit from right to left, it knitted the needles to the right of 0 with 1 ball of yarn, and here's the end coming out of that, and it knitted the needles to the left of 0 with the other ball of yarn. Now you have to, every single time your carriage is on the left, you have to put this right hand yarn up over those needles. That way it doesn't catch in those needles and get fouled up. And then you just lift up, approach the needle, and knit from left to right. Now once again, it knitted the left needles with this ball of yarn, and it knitted the right needles with that ball of yarn. And you keep on doing that. Each time you're on the left, put this right hand yarn up over the hooks. Now, when it's time to decrease, in my case now, I can do my full fashion V-neck decrease, just like this, on the right, and make sure that these stitches are in B position, lined up with their fellows, and the empty needle is back out of work. On the left, I do my decrease, make sure that that needle is back out of work, that empty one. Make sure the ones that have yarn in them are all lined up in upper working position. And then I knit from right to left again. On the left, I need to lift this yarn over the hooks. And when it's time to decrease again, I do the same thing I did before. Make sure these needles are lined up. Make sure the empties are back. Now you're probably wondering, what happens when I need to short row the shoulders? You can short row the shoulders at the same time as well. suppose this is our first row of short rowing, and we want to take off 2 stitches opposite the carriage and 1 stitch on the carriage side for our shoulders. You just bring those stitches into hold. Make sure the machine is set on H so that it slips those needles and does not knit them. And then you continue to knit. I'm going to follow that pattern, bringing 1 out on the carriage side. I have to be sure and keep it under the left yarn. I don't want any of this yarn to be under that needle. And then 2 opposite the carriage. Now, at this point, I'm finished on the right-hand side. I can actually clip that yarn. And in fact, I can just go ahead and hand knit this last stitch here and clip this yarn. So I've shaped both sides and I've shaped both shoulders. Now I need to scrap off. To scrap off, I will do the left side first, and I'm going to push those needles halfway back so they'll knit. I have turned off the multicolor button. I'm going to hand feed some waste yarn and just do a few rows to scrap that off. Oh, I can turn off needle selection too. Don't need it. Not that it would do any harm, but I don't need it. There's my left shoulder scrapped off. Let me drop those stitches. Take them out of work. Now let's do the right hand shoulder. Same way, I took the needles halfway back, threaded up with some of this scrap yarn. This is how it looks. We have our 2 stitches in the middle that we'll do something with. Actually, they'll be in the middle of the neckband. We have the 2 sides of the neck here. The full fashion decreases are an exact mirror image of each other. They're at exactly the same time as I knitted. And then here's the little body part of the swatch. So that's how to knit both sides of the neckline on an electronic machine where you can program it to select all the needles on one side. Now, what if you want to do this but you don't have an electronic machine? If I press the off button on my electronic machine and the lights go out, I can still do this. You can do this on just about any machine that has 2 color feeders, because you can run a second ball of yarn through that second feeder. Here's how to go at it. My machine is not set for hold, but I'm going to go ahead and set my machine up for multicolor. I'm putting that middle button in, just like I did before. And I'm taking a second ball of yarn and I'm threading it in that feeder. Now, my stitches to the right of 0 are going to be knitted with the ball of yarn that's already in work, and my stitches to the left of 0 are going to be knitted by the ball of yarn that I've just added. Now, before I can do that, I still have this little problem where I wanted to put the 2 middle needles on scrap yarn. I sewed my 2 middle stitches onto scrap yarn just like I did before. Now here's what's different. I bring all the needles to the left of 0 into hold. The machine will knit them just like the patterning system had selected them. It will knit them with the second color. So here I come. My machine, when I went from right to left, knitted the right hand needles with the first color, or the first ball of yarn I should say, and my left hand needles with the second ball of yarn. I have to put those needles in hold again, put the yarn on top of them. It's familiar except for the part where I bring them out by hand, isn't it? And then I knit back. And my machine knit the needles on the left with that ball of yarn, knit the needles on the right with that ball of yarn. Look, these aren't connected in the middle. It's doing just what I need it to do. Bring those out and repeat. This time, when it's time to do my decrease, I'll do it while the needles are back. It's a little easier, but then I have to bring the needles out after that. And when it's time to do my short rowed shoulder, I will have to put this whole side on hold, change my machine setting, and knit that side, then come back and knit this side later. But even with a machine that won't do one pattern all the way to the left of 0 and the other pattern all the way to the right, you can still use this technique.